What defines success?
You need to have the idea. You need to be early enough that you're novel, but not so early that the world doesn't get there in time.
What happens when you get knocked down?
Everyone has to tell me that I'm doing the wrong thing and making a mistake for me to believe that it's actually the right thing.
What makes some people radiate?
I believe that it's never too late to do something totally different, and I think that if you just hustle hard enough, you can make things happen.
This is Radiate.
Hi everyone, we're back. Welcome to the second season of Radiate, the show where we interview some of the world's most successful people to find out how they work their way to the top. We've got a great season ahead for you, and this week to kick things off, we're joined by Jon Steinberg, the former president of BuzzFeed. Yeah, you know, that's the place that brought you cat videos, food porn, the Try Guys, all sorts of other addictive content. Well, Jon helped steer the media company from a 15-person startup to one that's now valued at nearly $1 billion. After leaving BuzzFeed, Jon headed the Daily Mail briefly before zeroing in on his next startup, Cheddar, a business channel for millennials. In this conversation, Jon talks about his upbringing, what's critical when building a business from scratch, and the importance of unique ideas. If you're thinking about starting a company, you've got to listen in. So here we go with Jon Steinberg. Jon?
Betty?
I'm so glad that you agreed to do this.
It's great to be here. I don't know who should interview who, but I guess we'll let you start off.
Okay, so I guess I'm always in this seat, so I'll start off on that.
Okay.
All right, Jon, so this podcast is all about people's careers and, the challenges they've had in their careers. I have to say, you're too young for me to say, you're like still building your career,
no, I've
and
had
you've
a lot
done
of
so much.
challenges.
No.
Challenges.
Well, challenges, yes, but
yeah.
You've certainly created a lot, and you've achieved a lot in your career, and you're so young still. What do you think has been the secret for you?
I think that I don't really think that far into the future. Whenever somebody's asked me where I want to be in 5 or where I want to be in 10 years, I don't really have an answer for that, and I just think about one foot in front of the other, and I'm really good at what I call grinding. I'm a very anxious person, and I also obsess a lot. So that's sort of
what do you mean anxious?
I'm worried about everything, and if I want to do something, like I can't get it out of my head. It just sort of plays on a repeat track. Mm-hmm. Now that can like drive you crazy at times, but also if there's tasks that I want to get done, if I want to build something, if I want to license a piece of equipment, if I want to do a deal, I can't stop thinking about it and pushing it a little bit forward. Now when I was younger, that would have me like emailing people or calling them like 10 times in a day, like when I was like in my early 20s or something like that.
And did someone tell you to stop?
I mean, multiple times. I mean, I had professors telling me to leave them alone, but I learned it. I mean, by the time I was like in my mid 20s, I'd figured out how to like keep it to myself a certain amount.
Right.
But now I know how to balance it a little bit.
So where does that come from? I mean, what was your childhood like?
I think that my dad is that way. I mean, my dad is a very...
what did your dad do?
Well, my dad's an amazing story, actually.
Okay,
my dad was a podiatrist. My dad grew up blue collar, modest means in Newark, New Jersey. First member of his household to go to college, and his parents pushed him into being a doctor. He didn't want to be a doctor. We were living in New Jersey. He turned around 35, said he always wanted to be a real estate broker, and he moved us all into New York, left medicine, and became a real estate broker at the age of 35. And today he's very successful at that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you think it sounds like you've gotten quite a bit of that from him then, right?
Well, I believe in reinvention. I believe in reinvention, and I believe that it's never too late to do something totally different. And I think that if you just hustle hard enough, you can make things happen. I mean, there's a Gary Vee element to that. Like I do believe that. I do believe that like the harder I work, the luckier I get. But I do think that like luck plays an enormous role in these things too.
Did you know you'd always be in media?
I always loved media. I always loved technology. I mean, we'll probably get to this at some point. I always wanted to be a Disney Imagineer. That's all I ever wanted to do was drive.
Well, you were in their Imagineers camp, right?
There was actually not even a camp. I just became an intern. I wrote them kind of an unsolicited letter through a dial-up bulletin board system that they had established to recruit people at the age of 15, and I got an internship at Disney Imagineering. So I always knew that I was obsessed with Imagineering, which is basically imagination and engineering. This kind of mix between, I guess what Steve Jobs would call like, liberal arts and science. That kind of crossroads was always what interested me.
Interesting. And then what did you learn when you became an intern?
The best thing I learned is I worked for this guy, Dave Fink, who ran research and development. And I got out there, and the first few days I found where my desk was, and I got a Mac, and then I went to him and I said, what am I supposed to do? And he looked at me and he said, Jonathan. I went by Jonathan up until the age of, which is actually an interesting topic too, up until the age of about 28, everyone called me Jonathan.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What? And then what happened?
Well, that's
I want to hear this story. No,
That's-
wait, tell me this story, though.
Now we're going to just branch into that story? But let me finish this.
Okay, finish that one.
And Dave says, Jonathan, he goes, if I knew what you should do, I wouldn't have hired you. I would have just done it myself. And that was like an amazing revelation. The other thing he taught me was I went on a trip with them to the Silicon Graphics campus, and this was sort of the late 90s when Silicon Graphics was at the apex of its power. It did the graphics for Jurassic Park. It's on the campus where Google now is.
Wow.
And I was overwhelmed and I was nervous, and he said to me, these people aren't smarter than you. They just know things that you don't know. And if you study those things, you could know those things too. So he was very encouraging in a way where I felt like, well, I got to figure things out. I got to learn things. Why did I switch from going by Jonathan to Jon? I was constantly, my mom always wanted everyone to call me Jonathan. And people were always calling me Jon. And I would correct them and say, no, it's Jonathan. And what I realized was at a certain point, when people want to call you by like a short name, they feel friendly towards you, they feel affection towards you, they feel a closeness. And you telling them, no, call me by the formal name is basically you saying to them, I don't want your friendship. I don't want to be close to you. And what's interesting is I did this article for LinkedIn. I went through, I think, the Fortune 50 or the Fortune 100 or something, and almost everybody goes by a nickname or a short name, a name that's like 5 characters. Jack Welch, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Reed Hastings. Even though Reed is a formal name, it's it's 4 characters, right? It's very rare that you find somebody with a formal name that runs one of these large companies. So I just figured
that's interesting.
It is interesting. Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
It's
like that friendly connectedness to people. Is that what it was?
That's what it felt. And look, I mean, part of me is it pandering? Is it trying to give into the corporate establishment to let people call you by these names? I struggle with that a little bit, but ultimately I netted out on it that if people want to be close to you and they want to give you a term of affection, which effectively what a nickname is, that it's off-putting to tell them no. I got a friend whose name is Michael Bassick. He works at MDC Partners, the ad agency, and I used to always call him Mike because I just like him. I'm really close. I call him Mike, and he would always tell me no, call me Michael. And finally, I said, you're basic. I told him this whole thing, and now he goes by Mike. He lets people call him Mike Bassick. So I've converted people.
So you're going around converting people's names.
Look, your name Betty, right? That's what I would qualify as a nickname or a short nickname-like name, right?
Right. I met another Betty yesterday, by the way.
There's probably a lot of people that when you interview, it puts them at ease. They feel comfortable.
Right.
They feel like, if your name was Beatrice, there's a formality to that that I think makes people stand off a little bit.
I like so. But how about you internally? Do you feel like a Jon or do you feel like a Jonathan?
I feel like a Jonathan.
You feel like a Jonathan?
I feel like a Jonathan. I do. I think I feel like
But what does Jonathan symbolize to you?
To me, I feel like I'm an eccentric person. I always feel like I'm on the outside, and I think that Jonathan is sort of the name of an outsider. There's probably Jonathans listening to this podcast that are like really put off by that, but I don't know. But it's a long name. It's sort of a formal name.
Is that why your mother wanted people to call you Jonathan?
I think so. I think she thought it was the name that she had given me. The irony is that my middle name is Ian. I was almost named Ian after my grandpa Irving. And in many ways, I'm like my grandfather Irving. He was an entrepreneur. He operated warehouses for Chiquita Bananas, also in Newark, New Jersey. And so, I never met him. He died before I was born. But I was almost named Ian, and Ian is what I would qualify as a short nickname-like name.
You definitely have a family with interesting careers, by the way.
Yeah.
That sounds fascinating. Okay, so but you did go into an interesting career. An interesting job. BuzzFeed that was not your first job, was it?
It was an amazing, lucky bet that Jonah and Jonah Peretti and everybody put on me or gave to me.
And how old were you when you got the job?
Oh God, so that was 2010. So now we're in 2007. So 7 years ago, I guess. Call it. I'm 38 now, early 30s.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm 38 now.
Okay, so you had a little bit of a career before that.
Yeah, but I'd been a very, very mid-level employee at Google. I joke around now when I get to interact with senior people from Google, like Tim Armstrong or even Jared Grush, who's one of my really good friends, who is a senior lawyer at Google. I'm like, oh my God, when we were at Google, they wouldn't even let me breathe the same air that you guys were breathing, And that ultimately was what frustrated me about Google.
And now they're like, hey, Jon.
Well, I think in Google's old age, that's when Google became what I called a tenurocracy, which was whoever there was longest got sort of the next seat up. And I think that when Larry took over, there was a certain amount of correction that went on for that, but it was a very, very hierarchical place. I know that that's sort of contrarian to say about Google, but I certainly always felt that
No,
way.
but actually that's a very fitting thing to say about Google or any really big company, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even a Facebook or an Apple or
Yep.
a Microsoft in particular, is that when companies get bigger, they get more bureaucratic. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like you're someone who could never really thrive in a big company?
I think that I learned a lot at Google. I think I could thrive in a big company, and I think that I know how to navigate. There's probably people who know how to navigate it much better than me. And at different times in my career, I've liked working with a small team, and I've liked working with a larger team. When I joined BuzzFeed, I was the 15th employee. Basically, the second business employee, Eric Harris, was a guy there that was doing a lot of the business and operational stuff. He ended up being an amazing partner for me for the whole time that I was there. But I loved being at that small team. When BuzzFeed got to, 400 or 500 people, which was the time that I left, I loved that challenge. I loved the idea of delegation. I loved the idea of mentorship. The mentorship thing is something that I really found that I loved because I needed it so badly all throughout my career, and I always needed it in such specific things, which was, what do you do with a mid-level, a mid-performing employee? It's very easy what to do with an outperformer and underperformer. What do you do with a mid-performer? How do you handle certain bonus and comp things? How do certain HR things get dealt with? How do you do a reorg, right?
Right.
These were all things that I desperately wanted somebody to teach me. So when I meet with entrepreneurs now and I work with them and they say to me, what do you think we should do with the product? How should we do this? What color should this be? I always say to them, I don't know. I didn't build your business, so I can't help you with that. What I can help you with is how to hire and build a sales force, how to structure a support organization.
Right.
Because that's the stuff that's sort of timeless and never changes. And I'm happy to do that for them because I want people to do it for me. And what goes around comes around. I really believe what goes around comes around.
Well, I haven't known you that long, Jon, but I remember I was really struck when I first met you. How many people you put me in contact with, right? And how you helped. And I even said to you, I said, I'm surprised. I mean, I hardly even know you, and you're already helping me. Well, so you do walk that talk.
Yeah, I mean, karma is an amazing force. I have an amazing mentor and friend, a guy named Jerry Spire, who's a real estate developer in New York. I worked for him out of college. We did a real estate startup together. And, Jerry was very big on kind of putting into me this idea of reputation. And, you talk to anyone in New York City or basically anyone in the world about Jerry Spire, and every word comes back unbelievably positive. Everyone has something positive to say about Jerry, even if they were on the other side of a deal from him.
Right.
And I think people would say that about me. I think there's been people who've been on the other side of something from me and felt, that at least it was handled the right way, right? And
even if not the outcome that they wanted.
And I feel that way about, and there's a lot of people that I feel that way about.
Now, you mentioned when you were at Google, so
Yes.
you were a mid-level employee.
Yes.
And would you call yourself, were you an outperformer then, or you hadn't really struck out?
I don't know. I mean, I think I was. I think I performed well there. They would probably say that I didn't do everything I was supposed to do, and and didn't. I mean, I always had a hunger for growth, right? And I was in a unit that was doing small and medium business partnership deals. We would go and get yellow page companies to sell AdWords to small businesses.
Did you like that?
I liked it. I loved the team that I worked on, and I think we put up great numbers. And I think that Google had some ambivalency around how they felt about having a channel program at the time, wholesaling AdWords. But I felt like I did some great deals there. But I felt like no matter what I did, I couldn't see where it was going, right? I couldn't see where it was going for the company. I couldn't see where it was going in terms of my career trajectory. And ultimately, I felt like...
So you were frustrated?
I was frustrated, yeah. But I'm always frustrated, basically.
Okay. But at least at that point, you were frustrated.
I was frustrated,
and you made a move.
And I made a move, and it was an amazing... It was an amazing situation. I was at a VC firm, did an entrepreneurship in residence, an EIR for Polaris in New York. We looked at BuzzFeed. I met with Jonah. Jonah and I spent time thinking through his vision. I spent time listening to his vision and mapping out what it would look like as an investment case. And Jonah closed his round with RRE, ultimately not with Polaris. And he said to me, what do you think of coming here and being the business employee and building the revenue and doing that? And it was a contrarian thing to do at the time. Everybody told me, BuzzFeed was unproven. Who knew where it was going? You shouldn't do this. You should stay at the VC firm. You should become a VC partner. But I knew Jonah was one of a kind. I knew Ken Lair was one of a kind. These were two people who had built the Huffington Post.
Right.
No one else had built a standalone
They were
media
proven.
business. They were proven, right?
Yeah.
And I thought I'm getting offered the opportunity of a lifetime here. So, the one thing I always tell people is, if I really do believe everyone has to tell me that I'm doing the wrong thing and making a mistake for me to believe that it's actually the right thing. If everyone tells you, oh, you're doing the right thing.
By the way, do you carry that with you in other aspects? Like, let's say, investing, or let's say buying a house. I don't know,
I try to carry with me even in parenting. I went to my son's parent-teacher conference, and they said, wow, he's doing great. He's a lovely young man. He treats everybody with kindness and respect, but he spends a lot more time on the tasks that he likes. And if he's doing a task that he doesn't like, he tries to find a way to skip the steps to get right to the end step so he can complete the assignment. And I said, wow, that sounds amazing. I think he's doing great. and they said, well, I guess that's a higher level of logic. And so I try to question these things. When we went to go do all the private school interviews, my parents and my wife had to sort of step on my foot a little bit because I wanted to be a little bit provocative in my questioning of them.
I want to dig in a little bit.
Yeah. I think that people should focus on what they love, and I don't want my kids to go to college, right? So I try to have unconventional thoughts.
Wait, hang on. You what?
I don't want the kids to go to college.
You don't want your kids to go to college?
No, I don't really think so. I think if they love scholarship and they want to learn, and one of my children were to come to me and said, I want to learn about classics, I want to learn about engineering, I want to be a doctor, that I get. If they came to me at the age of 18 and said, I don't really know what I want to do, or I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to do this or that, but I feel like going to college for a vacation for 4 years to sort of figure it out. I think it's a very expensive and also not necessarily the most directed way to spend 4 years. I think it's a little bit of a, I don't quite get the deal. It doesn't strike me as a good deal anymore.
And have you told them this?
Yeah, I've told them that.
Okay, and how old are they though? First,
they're 6 and 7. They're 15 months apart.
Okay,
and it's funny. It's like my son is the one who says, "No, I don't want to go to college, but I want to make robots." I said, "Well, Cooper, if you want to make robots, that actually
you have to go to
college for, right?" So then he gets that. Like my daughter's the one who says she wants to go to college. And she wants to, but I think my wife is sort of more kind of,
Is this just your way of not funding a big college bill for 2 kids?
Yeah, but I'd want to invest.
Are you buying a vacation home somewhere?
I'll invest in their company, right? I would give them the capital to do that. Look how many people have knocked on to college and done remarkable things. Now, if you want to
But you went to college, of course.
I went to college, but I think I messed up that decision to a certain extent. I had 2 options. I got into Stanford, and I could have continued my internship with Disney if I had gone to Stanford. And at the last minute, I decided I didn't really want to move that far away from home because I'm very close to my family. And I chose to go to Princeton. Now, I loved Princeton. It was a good place. I learned a lot. But, if I had been out at Stanford, I would have been exposed to all that stuff in the Valley earlier. And I think I should have been out there. I probably would have gone out there for 2 years, dropped out, and been part of something. And maybe, not even the money. Maybe it wouldn't have worked out. But that was always the stuff that I loved. That's where I should have been,
So let's get back to BuzzFeed now, and talk about your career there. So when you first joined up with Ken Lair and Jonah Peretti, did you ever think, did BuzzFeed at that time, did you think that it was going to be the BuzzFeed that it is now?
No, of course not. No one envisioned something. I think if you envision something, if you claim that you envision something being that successful,
or even the way it looks, right? And the way it operates.
And that was, and there were so many instrumental moments and decisions, and many of which I wasn't part of. When I look back on it now, the most miraculous thing to me was what an amazing team, and how the team fell into place, and how we all worked so well together. And that was, lucky and work that ended up being the way it is. But no, I don't think anyone imagines, something that gets to that point with that many employees and that scale when you're 15 people in a small office on Spring Street.
Right. Okay.
But actually, one of the stories I love telling is I went to Jonah during one of the early months. I think it was my first month there, and I said, if I have no revenue this month and I come to the board meeting, is that going to be bad? 0 revenue. And he said, I don't think, I remember like it was yesterday. We were walking back from this place that had bibimbap,
Bibimbap. Yes.
Okay. And
Korean food.
Yeah. And he said, I don't think it'll be bad, but I think it'll be better if you had $50,000 in revenue. And then he told me a story that Kenny had told him, which is if you try to get to the top of the mountain, and you say, I'm going to get to the top of the mountain, it's too high. If you say, I'm going to get to this little peak, and then once I get to that little peak, I'll get to the next little peak, then it's attainable. And so what I always say is whenever someone says, I got to get to $10 million in revenue, I thought in my early days at BuzzFeed, how do I get to $50,000 a month? And what do I do that is ethical, legal, and doesn't screw up the company to get to $50,000 a month in revenue? And those are actually still 3 rules I use today. Is it ethical? Is it legal? And does it not screw up the company? Those are sort of my revenue generation rules.
I love that,
rules.
though.
Yeah.
It's like the things you avoid, and then you're free to do everything else.
And then you're free to do everything else. And then with it, right, and actually it really creates very good guardrails for an organization. And I repeat that all the time because I think it lets people kind of think outside the box without blowing themselves up a little bit,
How did you guys figure out your consumer so well at BuzzFeed? Like, how did that work?
That's really Jonah. I mean, I've always been sort of the business and the monetization person. I mean, he had this bet, this instinct that social traffic was going to take over the world.
Right.
And he started on that journey well before that even happened. And the world met up with his vision at a certain point. And there's a lot of examples of like this that occur in nature. I mean, Netflix is sort of like that to a certain extent too. They had this view that everybody would want to get their programming over the internet, that they want to watch it on demand. And broadband speeds and devices caught up and met them in the middle. And that's what you really need to happen, I think, for a new company or a new idea. You need to have the idea. You need to be early enough that you're novel, but not so early that the world doesn't get there in time. And a lot of the ideas now that are working with the internet that failed during the bubble, the dot-com bubble, were things
bad timing.
It was bad timing. These were fundamentally bad
I mean, think about even the tablet, right? I mean, tablets had been around for a while, but and smartphones even.
Yeah.
Right? And it just wasn't the right time.
And also, even you think back to Webvan.
That's right.
You could argue maybe they made some management missteps or something like that, but fundamentally, that's like Fresh Direct or even Amazon same day. And,
exactly.
Maybe if Jeff Bezos had been running it, it would have been a different story. I don't know.
Okay, so then let's get to the part that you really control, which is, and which is revenue, right? So you mentioned that story. I mean, let's take it from there. Like, how did you then go from zero revenue to just that 50,000?
So they had already run they had these yellow units, which are kind of the sponsored content units now, and they had already run a few campaigns in there. Actually, one for Comedy Central, another for a liquor brand, and we were deciding what would be the model. And at first I thought maybe publishers could pay for those units, and then I realized, well, the publishers don't have nearly as much money and need as the brands do. And then we decided, to call them story units, and we decided to make an orderly system for charging for people to be able to purchase them.
Right.
And then we decided, well, the brands don't have these creative services, so let's start providing the creative services to the agencies and brands so that they can create this content. And then we decided, well, nobody else is doing this. We're doing this at a scale. That's wrong. Other people were doing it, but no one was really betting their company on it.
Right.
Nobody was making it their sort of raison d'etre, their soul. We said, let's not do display. Let's do just this. Let's bet the company on it, and let's be focused and push incredibly hard on it. And there's two lessons in that. First is you really can. It's true. You can only do one thing. You can only have one product that you're really pushing incredibly hard on. And the other thing is, I truly believe you've got to be doing something that nobody else is doing. And so many of the companies now that are trying to copy somebody else's playbook, it's not just that that's lame, it's just that it never works. If you
Do you roll your eyes when you see that?
Yeah, I mean,
and you're like, that's wasted money down the toilet.
When I look now and I see all these companies going into branded content and native advertising, many of the traditional ones that said they would never do it because they thought that it would have these problems and it wasn't right and it would confuse readers and now that they're all going into it, they're of course doing what incumbents do, which is they're going into something, 10 years later, right?
But do you think there's no future then, or do you think the future is limited in branded and sponsored content?
I think the future is limitless in terms of what people can imagine, and I thought of one model. I worked with a team that thought of one model for that. And there's other models that people just need to think of. But saying, I'm just going to do somebody else's model, I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to try to do it late.
Is lame.
It just doesn't work. I mean, you can think of counterexamples. You can think of, okay, well, Apple went into the smartphone market and the tablet market late and won, right? But Apple is such an outlier compared to everything else. I think most of the times when you're copying somebody else's playbook, it doesn't work out well for you. If you want to take something, virtual reality is something I've never done anything in, right? Mm-hmm. New York Times has made this bet on virtual reality. Mark Thompson, the CEO, came out and said that it's already profitable. To be honest, I didn't read the article. I just saw the headline. But they're doing something totally different there. That shipping out the cardboard thing.
Have you tried it, by the way?
Yeah, I have tried it.
And did you like it?
I thought it was pretty good. I think for a piece of cardboard that you put your smartphone in, I think it works remarkably well. I'll tell you, my kids think it's amazing. So.
So we'll see, right?
So we'll see, right?
Yeah. But it's something that's a little bit different.
You got to be doing something different.
And surprising that New York Times is doing that, right?
Yeah,
that's traditionally old media company.
And that's sort of my point. I think New York Times is a good example for a few other things. They also came out with this idea of day parting.
Yes.
And putting units in that are day part, and they call them like mobile moments or something like that. I think that's clever too. You gotta be inventing something new. You can't just sell the same thing to people that are already buying it from somebody different.
So, Jon, what happened at BuzzFeed? Why did you leave?
Look, it's so funny. I haven't been asked that question. I thought people had tired of asking that question. I'd been there 4 years. It was an amazing experience. I took it from, with Joan and the rest of the team from 15 to 500 people into a big revenue business, and I wanted to do something else, and ultimately, that's just part of my DNA.
Tell me the real reason. What's the real reason?
No, that really, honestly, that really is the real reason. I mean, it was an amazing run. It was an amazing period, and there was other people to take it to the level after that.
But did you end up having disagreements with management and the board?
No.
Because that is, by the way, what sometimes happens, right? As companies get.
But also, I'll tell you something. The amazing thing is that, businesses, especially high growth businesses, have periods of time where you're the right person for them. And the amazing part about it was that that it worked for me to be the right person in years 1, 2, 3, and 4. Remember, I was literally doing the decks myself.
Yes.
And doing all the sales calls myself. And then at a point, we were managing an organization that had hundreds of people. What's more amazing is that I was still there in year 3 and year 4 to me, because I had
when
to
sometimes people leave already.
I had to like reinvent myself, rechange my skill set.
Yeah.
So that's kind of more surprising to me. So it's always, the other thing too is it really is a New York attitude about why did you leave after 4 years, right? Silicon Valley, this question never gets asked. I actually think it's a big problem in New York, which is that we don't have this moving around, that it's so. People take such heat when they go from one place to another.
Right, like
whereas in the
what
Valley,
happened
what
there?
happened? There's 1,000 questions.
Yes.
I mean, what's amazing is the day that I left, there was a high profile. I wish I could remember who it was. A person higher profile than me that went from Facebook to Twitter, I think, or something like that. Nobody asked any questions. Nobody cared. That's just what happened in Silicon Valley. Look, I think we got to correct that about New York.
Right, because implicit in that question is, oh, Jon, like, did something happen? Like, was there a falling out? All of that, right? I mean, of course, implicit in that question.
Did Sheryl Sandberg have a falling out at Google, or David Fisher, or Grady Burnett, or should I rattle off 14 more people that went from Google to Facebook? How about all the Facebook people that went to Twitter, or
Agreed. Okay, so we talked to every person we've talked to for this podcast, we've asked like what are their worst moments in their career, right?
Yeah.
So we've kind of gone through your whole entire trajectory so far. So what, Jon, has been your worst moment in your career?
I think my worst moment was I had this Disney internship at a very young age. I went to college, and then I did a startup after college that didn't work out. And at that point, I turned around and I went back to business school. And suddenly, having been special in my teens, and having had this amazing Disney, internship and being like a wonderkind, I was suddenly like, I suddenly had nothing, right? I was just this guy who had done a startup that had failed and was now at business school like everybody else. And my entire life, having everyone tell me like I was unique and special for having done this, I certainly wasn't special, right? I certainly felt not special. And I didn't know where to go from there. I was almost like a child actor whose show goes off the air. And I think that was tough for me to figure my way out of. And I think I had I was a consultant at Booz Allen, and then I worked at, there was a period of years where I felt like, well, I'm never going to be able to do anything that's really cool. That Disney was the coolest thing I ever did, and that's over. And now it's just sort of like, random stuff I'm going to have to do from here on out. So that was depressing.
It's like a fear. You had this fear of being just this average person, doing average things.
Yeah, I mean, that makes it sound even, I felt like I had a fear that it wasn't going to be that interesting from here on out. Like it was just going to be
is this it?
Is this it? Right, is this it? I think I felt like, well, is this it, right? And the worst thing was I was doing this thing with Booz Allen where I was working in Northern Virginia on this project, and I would fly in Monday morning, I would work in this government building, then I would go back to my hotel at night, do more work and eat and go to sleep and get up. And then I was like, oh my God, how did this end up like this, right? And everything started out so bright, and now it was so dim. And
I'm in Virginia.
I'm doing this thing, and also all the people that I'm working with think that I'm terrible at this job because I joined Booz Allen to work in their media practice. There was no media jobs in 2003, and they were like, "You've never had a driver's ticket. You got a perfect record." I have a perfect record because I grew up in New York and I don't really drive that much. And they're like, "So you go work for the government?" And I was like, "Oh, like you can work for the government or you can not have your job. How does that sound?" I'm like, "Okay, I guess I'm going to work for the government." That was the low point of my career.
That was a low point. And early on, you said something like, you're a worrier, right? That you worry a lot.
Yeah.
So is that in a way a motivating sort of like characteristic for you?
No, I think it's just a negative. I think that everybody looks around and thinks everybody else is doing great and everything's perfect. But
do you feel that way too?
No, I don't, because I have things that bother me all the time, and I'm worried all the time. And I think that it makes me recognize in other people a humanity that certain people aren't able to recognize, right? Certain people, I would often deal with salespeople putting together a pitch, and it would be like 30 pages long and really buried. And I would say to them, the person reading this is looking at 50 of these. They got into work. They had a problem with their kid. They've got this health-related thing going on. They've got this financial, personal thing going on. And this is not the focus of their life, right? And so I think that's helpful. I think I'm good at seeing things through in other people's shoes.
It's empathy, right? It's having that empathy.
Yeah. EQ is what some people call it, right? Probably saying that I feel like I have high EQ is like the least EQ thing that you can possibly say. But I don't think I have high EQ, but I think that through my own difficult lens of seeing the world, I can relate to other people's difficult lenses. I think that everybody walks around and thinks, I'm the only person with problems and worries, and everybody else is having this perfect life. And
which is not true,
right? Which is not true. And the people that you think that are like the smoothest ducks sailing across the water are frantically paddling. So I think it puts it in perspective,
And is there one thing that you worry about all the time, or is there is there one negative thing that you feel like you just haven't been able to shake?
No, I think it's everything. I think that...
You worry about your job, or you worry about your kids?
I worry about deals. I worry about jobs. I worry about, just everything under the possible sun, but I think a lot of people do, actually.
Next week on Radiate, a good friend of the show, Mohamed El-Arian, like you've never heard him before. One of the smartest economists in the world fesses up to his own career mistakes and gives some valuable life lessons. Now, before we go, please do me a favor and log on to our new website, radiateinc.com/feedback, and please take our survey. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, ideas on what we're doing. We've got exciting new things in store, and your feedback will be critical in helping me shape what's to come. If you liked what you heard on the podcast, also please review us on iTunes and find me on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us. I'm Betty Lou. Talk to you next week on Radiate.